ॐ विश्वन्दर्पण दृश्यमाननगरी तुल्यन्निजान्तर्गतं पश्यन्नात्मनि मायया बहिरिवोद्भूतं यथा निद्रया यः साक्षात् कुरुते प्रबोधसमये स्वात्मानमेवाद्वयं तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नम इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये नारायणं पद्मभुवं वसिष्ठं शक्तिं च तत्पुत्रपराशरं च व्यासं शुकं गौडपदं महान्तं गोविन्दयोगीन्द्रमथास्य शिष्यं श्रीशङ्कराचार्यमथास्य पद्मपादं च हस्तामलकं च शिष्यं तन्तोटकं वार्तिककारमन्यान् अस्मद्गुरून् सन्ततमानतोऽस्मि श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः परब्रह्मनिष्ठं स्वतो धर्मनिष्ठम् अहिंसैकनिष्ठं स्वशिष्यै सुजुष्टं यतीनां वरिष्ठं गुरूणां गरिष्ठं दयानन्दरूपं मदाचार्यमीडे नमः श्री परमार्थाय संसाराध्यासनाशिने श्रोत्रिय ब्रह्मनिष्ठाय तस्मै ब्रह्मविदे नमः सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् ॐ तपोभिः क्षीणपापानां शान्तानां वीतरागिणां मुमुक्षूणामपेक्षोऽयम् आत्मबोधो विधीयते. I welcome you all to the 24th class of the Ātma Bodha series. We will read verses 56 to 59 that we covered in the last class and then proceed from there. Tiryagudhvamadah purnam
Tiryagudhvamath purnam
Satchidanandamadvayam
Satchidanandamadvayam
Anantam nityamekam yat
Anantam nityamekam yat
Tadbrahmetyavadharayet
Tadbrahmetyavadharayet
Atadvyavrittirupena
Atadvyavrittirupena
Vedantairlakshyate dvayam
Vedantairlakshyate dvayam
Akhandanandamekam yat
Akhandanandamekam yat
Tadbrahmetyavadharayet
Tadbrahmetyavadharayet
Akhandanandarupasya
Akhandanandarupasya
Tasyanandalavashritaha
Tasyanandalavashritaha
Brahmadhyastaratamyena
Brahmadyastaratamyena
Bhavantyanandinokhilaha
Bhavantyanandinokhilaha
Tadyuktamakhilam vastu
Tadyuktamakhilam vastu
Vyavaharastadhanvitaha
Vyavaharastadhanvitaha
Tasmat sarvagatam brahma
Tasmat sarvagatam brahma
Kshire sarpirivakhile.
Kshire sarpirivakhile.
In these verses, Bhagavad is talking about the glory of Brahman and the glory of Brahma Vidya. And in the process, Bhagavad is picking up the select, choicest messages from the various Upanishads and presenting them here. So many of these verses are very traceable to the different Upanishads that we have been bringing up now and then during the class. So in verse 56, Bhagavad is pointing out Tiryagudhvam adhah purnam, that Brahman is not limited by any direction. And it's of the nature of existence, consciousness, Satchidanandam, Advayam, limitless existence, consciousness. And Brahman doesn't have any space-wise limitation, Anantam. And Brahman doesn't have any time-wise limitation either, Nityam. And Ekam meaning Brahman is one, and Advayam meaning without a second. The Brahman is not limited by space, not limited by time, and not limited by any objects. So the one that has such a nature, know that to be Brahman, is what Bhagavad is teaching us. Then Bhagavad points out, Vedantaihi lakshate, that this Brahman cannot be known through any of the Laukika Pramāṇas, like Pratyaksha, Anumana, Arthapattihi, Upamana, Anupalabdhihi. Because all of these Pramāṇas are based on Pratyaksha, perception, sense perception, but Brahman is beyond sense perception. And it cannot be known through Laukika Shabdas either, because Laukika Shabdas are just carriers of knowledge that have been gained, that has been gained through the various Laukika Pramāṇas. Therefore, we have to come to the Vedanta Śabda Pramāṇa. Vedantaihi lakshate, he says. And even when we come to the Vedanta Śabda Pramāṇa, we have to note that Brahman is not the direct meaning of any word. Because Vedanta is using known words in the language. And known words in the language are there in order to refer to some experience that we have of some object or some attribute. That is why words are there in a language. But Brahman is not the vachyartha of any such word. And therefore, Vedantaihi lakshate, we have to come to the implied meaning of these words. Brahman cannot directly be pointed out as this is Brahman. Because we say that everything that is this has to be negated. Because it is drishyam. Whatever is drishyam has to be negated. And therefore, atad vyavritti rupena, tad refers to Brahman, atad refers to that which is not Brahman. Vyavritti means separation or negation. So through the negation of all that which is not Brahman, as not this, not this, not this, meaning through the negation of everything that is drishyam, then one comes to understand what Brahman is, even though Brahman has not been pointed out directly as a this object. So one may ask that what is left? If I have negated all that is this, all that is drishyam, then what is left? This is where Vedanta points out that the one who is negating the drik, the seer, the knower, is never the drishyam, and therefore can never be negated. So the non-negatable, the unnegatable drik remains after negating all the drishyam. And the implication is that that drik, which remains unnegated after negating everything that is negatable, is Brahman. Atat vyavritti rupena vedantaihi lakshate. And how? And finally, what does Vedanta indicate? What does Vedanta teach about this Brahman? It says, Akhandanandam ekam advayam. Of the nature, Brahman is of the nature of fullness, limitlessness, completeness. Akhandanandam ekam advayam, one and non-dual. Then in the next verse, Bhagavad proceeds to dwell a bit upon this Akhandanandam. What is Akhandanandam? Akhandananda is really Atmananda, the nature of Ananda. We have Pratibimbananda, which is this reflected Ananda, or Koshananda, also called as Koshananda, that comes and goes. But Atmananda never comes and goes, being the nature of Atma, being the nature of Brahma. And therefore, Bhagavad is differentiating Atmananda from Koshananda or Pratibimbananda. He is differentiating Bimbananda from Pratibimbananda. The original Ananda from this reflected Ananda or experienced Ananda. And this message is again very clearly traceable to the Taittiriya Upanishad, as we saw. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, there is a discussion about various levels of experienced happiness. Pratibimbananda, various levels of Pratibimbananda or Koshananda. And there are these levels because any reflection depends upon the reflecting medium. We see even with our own face, if we see the reflection of our face in a dull, unpolished mirror, the reflection also appears to be very dull. On the other hand, if we see the reflection of our own face in a highly polished, very clean mirror, then the reflection appears to be very bright. So here too, in the reflecting media, meaning in the mind, where there is more of rajas, more of tamas and less of sattva, then the reflection is duller as compared to a mind where there is a predominance of sattva and very little rajas and tamas. So there is a gradation in the levels of experienced ananda. So the Taittiriya Upanishad starts with one unit of ananda, which is the ananda of a manushya. And here also Bhagavad is pointing out Akhilaha Brahmadyaha Taratamyena Bhavanti Anandinaha Akhilaha. So Akhilaha Brahmadyaha Taratamyena Anandinaha Bhavanti. All the beings from Brahmaji, from Chaturmukha Brahma to the smallest of the ants, they all experience happiness, but their happiness is graded. So here Ātma Bodha starts with Brahmadyaha, meaning starting with Brahmaji. But in Taittiriya Upanishad, it's given in an opposite order, where he starts with the Ananda of Manushya. And what kind of Manushya? He is a Yuva, meaning a young person. And what kind of young person is he? A Sadhu Yuva. He is not one of these young people who is just partying and drinking and whiling his life away. He is a highly ethical, refined and cultured young person, Sadhu Yuva. And Adhyayakaha, meaning also learned in the scriptures. And Ashishto, Dridhishto, Balishtaha, meaning he's very dynamic, he's the most dynamic, has the firmest resolve. And he is also the strongest person, Balishtha. And not just this, he rules over the entire earth with all of its riches. Like we said, all the oil fields, all the gold mines, all the diamond mines, all the resources, he rules over that. So what would be the happiness of such a person? It is one unit of Ananda, which is Manushya Ananda. But then Taittiriya Upanishad goes on to talk about totally 11 levels of Ananda, as we saw. The next level of Ananda that Taittiriya Upanishad talks about is Manushya Gandharvananda, which is the Ananda of a Manushya Gandharva in the Manushya Gandharva Loka. And because of the nature of the equipment, which is subtler and is able to reflect Atmananda somewhat more clearly, his Ananda is 100 times that of Manushyananda. So there is Manushyananda, Manushya Gandharvananda, and then Deva Gandharvananda, which is 100 times the prior level. And then Pitrinam Ananda, the Ananda of the Pitrinam, Ananda of the Pitru people in the Pitraloka, the Jivas in the Pitraloka. And then there's Ajana Janam Ananda, Ajana Janam Devanam Ananda, which is yet another Swargaloka. Which is Swargaloka, the Ananda of the Devas in Swargaloka. And then there is Karma Devanam Ananda. And then there is Devanam Ananda. And Indrasya Ananda, Brihaspatehe Ananda, Prajapatehe Ananda, Brahmana Ananda. So totally 11 levels. So the highest experiential happiness that is possible in this creation is through the equipment of Chaturmukha Brahma, Brahmaji, or in other words, Hiranyagarbha. This is the entire Sukshma Prapancha. The firstborn. We often see that in the temples they denote that through the Nabhi of Narayana, there is this lotus, and from that emerges Brahmaji. So Brahmaji is the firstborn in this creation, also called Hiranyagarbha, which is basically, as we have seen in Tattva Bodha, what is born first from Brahman and Maya. What is it that comes out first? It is the entire Sukshma Prapancha. That is Hiranyagarbha. That is what Brahmaji really represents. So the Ananda of Brahmaji is really 10 to the power of 20 times that of Manushyananda. This is the highest possible experiential Ananda that is attainable in this Shrishti. So now, what Ātma Bodha points out is that if you put the Ananda of all these beings together, Ananda Lavashritaha, Tasya Akhandanandasya Ananda Lavashritaha, meaning all of these beings starting from Manushya to Brahmaji, their Ananda is just a small fraction, a minute reflection of Atmananda. So as we saw, we took the example of the early morning dew. So if we look at the various leaves of the plants, then we see these tiny dewdrops. And then near that there are somewhat bigger dewdrops and still bigger dewdrops. And then there are some really big dewdrops also. They all have their reflection of the sun. And then nearby there is a little bit of water, right? Like a puddle, but it's not a dirty puddle. It's a very clear puddle of water. I don't know if we can even call it a puddle technically, but a very small pool of water. And then there's a pond and a lake and so on. So if you look at it, all of these have got the reflection of the sun in it. The reflection of the sun gets progressively bigger. So perhaps the reflection in the sun in that large lake, you could say, is 10 to the power of 20 times the reflection in the smallest dewdrop. So the reflection gets progressively bigger. But if you put together all of these reflections, how does it compare to the sun itself? When you take the original sun, then there is no comparison at all. You can't even call these reflections to be a fraction. We are being generous by saying that it is really a fraction. It's really a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. You can continue that to infinity, really speaking. So, tasya akhandanandasya ananda lavashritaha. This is what Atmananda really is. Because whatever level of ananda you take, it has its boundaries. And therefore, as we have seen, each of these beings also has some sense of apurnatva. We saw even Indra has these, we come across these stories in the Puranas where Indra becomes insecure. Indra finds himself to be deficient, wanting, inadequate. So no matter how high this level of experienced Ananda is, it's always accompanied by some shade of apurnatva. Whereas in Atmananda, there is no trace of apurnatvam at all. Atma being Purnaha, limitless, full and complete. Therefore, there is no comparison at all. And as we said, if somebody asks, how do I experience the Atmananda? Then it is like the sugar asking, how do I experience sweetness? What do we tell the sugar? We tell the sugar that the sweetness you are experiencing everywhere is really your sweetness only. If you take a gulab jamun, then the sweetness that comes from the gulab jamun, really, what is its origin? It is the sugar. If you take jangri, how does the sweetness come in the jangri? The origin of that is the sugar. So now the sugar is seeing all of these different levels of sweetness, starting from this smallest sweet to perhaps I don't know what an example of the smallest sweet would be, but perhaps some small, really small candy or something like that. Sometimes you have these small balls of colored balls. So the sugar observes that there is this sweetness in this colored ball, and then there is this sweetness in payasam, right from here to there. Then he's asking, I'm seeing all these gradations of sweetness, and you're telling me that all of these sweetness comes from this Atmana, from this in this case, from the sugar. So how do I experience that? If the sugar is asking, let us say, what do we tell the sugar? We tell the sugar that, hey, all of this that you're seeing here is your own manifestation. It is like you seeing your own reflection in the mirror, and then you're asking, how do I see the original face? So all of this is your manifestation. But just like you cannot experience your original face, you can only see its reflection. Similarly, you cannot directly experience this Atmananda. You can only experience its reflection. Because you are that Atmananda. You are that very sweetness that you are seeking. So, tasya akhandananda rupasya ananda lavashritaha. Then Bhagavad goes further to point out that any object that we are interacting with in this world is pervaded by Brahman. As he said, tad yuktam akhilam vastu. So every object is pervaded by Brahman. And whenever you are transacting with something, whenever you are touching any object, that transaction is also associated with Brahman, just as it is impossible to touch a pot without touching the clay. So it is Brahman alone that appears as all these Namarupas. Just like in our dream, if I'm touching a pot in the dream, I'm really touching the waker. Because the pot is nothing but a thought in the mind of the waker. So in the dream, when I'm touching the pot, when I'm transacting with the pot, I'm really transacting with the waker. Because the waker pervades that entire dream. So similarly here too, the entire Srishti has emerged from Brahman. Brahman is the Vivatta Upadana Karanam. Brahman is the only substantial reality. Brahman is the existence, being the Satyam, therefore it pervades everything. So whenever I'm touching anything, whenever I'm transacting with anything, I am really transacting with Brahman. And therefore, Tasmat Sarvagatam Brahma, Kshire Sarpihi Iva Akhile. So just like butter pervades milk, Bhagavad gives this example. So as we saw, we were towards the end of the last class, we were talking about scuba diving in the milky ocean. So wherever we see, above, below, left, right, front, back, everywhere there is milk. And the milk is pervaded by butter. But I don't see that butter. One has to go through a special process to extract that butter. Similarly, you can compare the entire creation around me, the entire universe around me to be milk, which is pervaded by the butter of Brahman. That is not visible to my normal eyes. I have to go through the process of extracting this butter. Like we said, we have to go through the process of extracting this butter like Brahman. As we said, the butter is extracted through the process of churning. Therefore, we have to do this churning in Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam in order to understand that Brahman pervades the entire world. We'll go to the next verse. Ananvasthulamahraswam
Ananvasthulamahraśvam
Adirghamajamavyayam
Adirghamajavyayam
Arupagunavarnakhyam
Arupagunavarnakhyam
Tadbrahmetyavadharayet.
Tadbrahmetyavadharayet.
Like we saw, many of these verses are traceable to the Upanishads. And this message, Bhagavad is extracted from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So as we saw in the last verse, butter is inherent in all of milk, but it is not available to see, to perceive with my regular eyes. So similarly, Brahman here pervades the entire creation, but it is not available for my regular eyes. It is not available for my normal pramanas, laukika pramanas. And that is what Bhagavad is emphasizing on here. So the reason why Brahman is not visible to my laukika pramanas, to the regular laukika pramanas, is given here. So he says ananuhu. So it says, the verse says ananvasthulam. So it is really, if you split the sandhi, it becomes ananuhu asthulam. That becomes ananvasthulam. Bhagavad Pada says ananuhu. So if you say anuhu means a very, very small particle. Like in Tarkashastra or in Nyaya Vaisheshika, they talk about paramanuhu. Parama anuhu is paramanuhu. Paramanuhu means a very, very small particle, the smallest particle actually. Just like the atomic theory. Scientists initially considered the atoms to be the smallest particles, but then they broke it and found smaller particles. According to Nyaya Vaisheshika, the smallest particle is called paramanuhu. Parama anuhu. So anuhu means a small particle, but in this context, it means small, just small. So he says ananuhu. meaning the Brahman is not small. Atma is not small. When we say Atma is not small, Brahman is not small, we immediately, the mind is like a pendulum. So if you say this, you can't be on this end, then it swings to the other end. So mind immediately thinks that, oh, perhaps it is big. So he immediately clarifies asthulam, meaning that it is not big also. You cannot call it big. And he says ahrasvam, meaning it is not short. And immediately we think about perhaps it is very long. So he says adirgham, it is not long also. So not small, not big, not short, not long. So what does all this mean? We see all of these adjectives like small, big, short, long, they are all adjectives of nama rupas. Nama rupas that we have experienced. And we are trying to fit Brahman in this picture of our nama rupa. You have seen various nama rupas, and compared to that, small, short, long, big, etc., we're thinking about all that. But Brahman pervades the smallest object we can think of. Brahman pervades that also. It's the content of that also. And for example, you take the smallest quark, whatever it may be, the smallest particle you can think of, Brahman pervades that also. Therefore, the Upanishad says, Anoho Aniyan, meaning it is smaller than the smallest. Anuhu becomes Anoho Aniyan, is smaller than the smallest. And Mahato Mahiyan, it is larger than the largest. Whatever largest object you can think of, perhaps the largest galaxy or some largest black hole, whatever it may be. Again, Brahman pervades that also and extends beyond that also. So it cannot be said to be large also in the normal sense of the word. And therefore, Brahman cannot be qualified by any size. So it is negating any concept of size in Brahman. All size is associated with Nama Rupas. Therefore, we say the Brahman doesn't have any size, meaning it is not spatially limited, not limited by space at all. So then the mind immediately thinks that perhaps it is limited by time. Perhaps Brahman has a beginning in time and an end in time. Again, Ātma Bodha negates it, saying ajam. Ajam meaning Brahman was never born in time. Because even before Srishti, as we saw, Brahman was always there. So we then think that perhaps Brahman has no beginning, but it could have an end. Like we say, ignorance has no beginning, samsara has no beginning. Your janmas have no beginning. But all of these have an end. So is Brahman like that? Again, Ātma Bodha negates it, saying avyayam. Avyayam meaning Brahman has no decay, no death. Brahman, even though the entire Srishti gets resolved, Brahman continues. Therefore, ajam, avyayam meaning Brahman has no beginning in time and no end in time. Therefore, spatially not limited, time-wise not limited. And then Ātma Bodha says arupa guna varnakhyam. Arupa. So if we take rupa to mean form, then Brahman is without form, arupa. Guna varnakhyam, without attributes, guna. And without color, varna can be taken to be color. Akhyam, without name. So Brahman is without name and form, without namarupa, without attributes, without color, etc. Or we could take rupa to mean color. Generally, rupa is more closely translated as color. So if we take rupa to mean color, then it would be arupa guna varnakhyam. Then we have to give another meaning for varna. So if we take rupa to be form, we can take varna to be color. They both mean color. and that would be an unnecessary repetition, which is generally avoided. So if we take Rupa to be color, then Varna can be taken to be a lineage of some sort. Like we say Brahmana, Kshatriya, etc. So none of these attributes are there in Brahman. And this is the reason why Brahman cannot be perceived by the senses. It is not available for Pratyaksha Pramāṇa and therefore not available for all the Laukika Pramāṇas. Therefore, we have to come to the right Pramāṇa. That is the implication of this. And again, this discussion borrows from the Chāndogya Upaniṣad. We talked about the Chāndogya Upaniṣad in the last few classes where we talked about Shvetaketu and Uddalaka. Shvetaketu had come back from the Gurukula and Uddalaka is teaching him Brahma Vidya. So Uddalaka wants to make this point, the Chāndogya Upaniṣad wants to make this point that Brahman is not available for the Laukika Pramāṇas. And the way the Guru teaches the student, in this case, is he asks him to bring some water. And he also asks him to bring some salt. He says, now place the salt in this water. And then he says, now leave it alone. Then the next day he calls him again and says, now bring me that water. So by now the salt has dissolved in the water. So now he says, now trace the salt in the water. Trace the salt. Show me some evidence that the salt is there in the water. So first he tries to use his touch. With the touch, can he feel the salt? And he cannot touch the salt anymore because it is dissolved in the water. He knows it is there, but he can't touch it. Then he tries to see whether he can somehow see this salt in that water. He cannot see it either. So we point out that people who end up using the wrong pramanas end up becoming atheists. So somebody who insists on using the sense of touch and the sense of sight as a pramana in order to know the presence of the salt will end up becoming a salt atheist. He will claim there is no salt in this water. I can't perceive the salt with the pramanas that I accept, which is just the sense of touch and the sense of sight. You can even add the sense of smell. Perhaps if he tries to bring his nose close to it, he says, I can't smell anything. And if he tries to hear it, right? Again, he cannot make out the presence of salt. Water without salt and water with salt will produce similar sounds. So now the Guru tells him, there is only one pramana that can provide you this evidence. Take one droplet of water from the top of this and sip it. And when he sips it, he says, Lavarnamiti. Yes, it is salty. Then he says, take a droplet of water from the middle of this and sip it. He says, Lavarnamiti. It's salty. And take a droplet from the bottom and sip it. Again he says, Lavarnamiti. Therefore now he knows there is salt. Not just that there is salt, but it pervades that entire water. So those who refuse to use the right pramana in order to get the evidence, they will end up becoming salt atheists. So similarly in our case also the whole creation is pervaded by Brahman. But if you insist on using the Laukika Pramāṇas, which includes Pratyaksham, any form of Pratyaksham, Śabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha, or Hanuman, Arthapatti, Upamana, Anupalabdhi, you cannot get any evidence of Brahman through these Pramanas. And even Laukika Shabdas will not work. That is why we say you have to come to the tongue of the Vaidika Śabda Pramāṇa. Only through the Vaidika Śabda Pramāṇa, through the tongue of the Vaidika Śabda Pramāṇa, I can know about the presence of Brahman. And therefore, Bhagavad is pointing out here that the entire world is pervaded by this invisible Brahman that is not available for my usual senses, like the pervasion of butter in milk, as we saw, or like salt in water, as we saw the example from the Chāndogya Upaniṣad. Therefore, one has to know Tad Brahmetyavadharayet. May you ascertain that Brahman is there by coming to the appropriate pramana, which is Vedānta Śabda Pramāṇa. We'll go to the next verse. Yad bhasa bhasyaterkadi
Yadbhasa bhasyaterkadi
bhasyair yattu na bhasyate
bhasyair bhasyate
yena sarvamidam bhati
yena sarvamidam bhati
tad brahmetyavadharayet.
tadbrahmetyavadharayet.
So here, again, Bhagavad is presenting the mantra, na tatra suryo bhati na chandratarakam nema vidyuto bhanti kutoyam agnihi tameva bhantam anubhati sarvam tasya bhasa sarvamidam vibhati, which is borrowed from the Muṇḍaka and Kaṭhopaniṣads. So Bhagavad is paraphrasing this mantra in the form of a verse. So in Vedanta, the term light or jyotihi is used in a somewhat technical sense, not literally just referring to the light that we know of. But Vedanta uses the term light or jyotihi as a principle. It defines it as a principle in the presence of which things are known and in the absence of which things are not known. So by this definition, Suryaha, so as we said, na tatra suryo bhati na chandra tarakam nema vidyuto bhanti kutoyam agnihi. So we take Suryaha first. So the sun qualifies as a light because in the presence of the sun we know various objects in this world during daytime. And in the absence of the sun at night and in the absence of any other light, we don't know. We are not able to know things. And therefore the sun qualifies as a light. And so also we can say the moon is a light because on an Amavasya, on a Paurnami night, the moon illumines the objects that are otherwise and that would otherwise remain unknown. So Surya, Chandra, and Tarakam, meaning all these stars, they are also lights. Even though we don't use the light of the stars because they are too distant practically, we understand that even our sun is a star. And therefore there are other stars like our sun that illumine their own worlds. Therefore even stars are lights. And even lightning, vidyuto bhanti. So even these flashes of lightning, they are lights because you can imagine staring out a window, it's pitch dark outside. The moment there is this flash of lightning, suddenly the contours of everything becomes visible. You can say there is a shed here, there's a hill behind, and then there is some kind of a pond or a lake nearby. You can make all this out just with a flash of lightning. And so also Agnihi qualifies as a light. So all of these are lights, no doubt. But then Vedanta goes further and it says that even our sense organs can be taken to be a light. Each of them can be taken to be lights. So how is that? Because even if the sun is shining, if my sense organ is not there, for example, if I close my eyes, I cannot see the shining of the sun. The shining of the sun is not known. So in the presence, when I use my eyes, objects are known. If I don't use my eyes, objects are not. Therefore, even my eyes become a light that reveals forms and colors. So similarly, my sense of hearing can also be taken to be a light because it reveals sounds. Without that sense of hearing, the sounds will not be known. Similarly, even my touch can be taken to be a light because my sense of touch reveals textures that would otherwise not be known. So even my sense organs can be taken to be a light. But Vedanta now goes further and says that even the mind is like a light. Because if my sense organs are operational but not backed by the mind, then the objects are not known. For example, Swamiji uses this phrase, you are here, but you don't hear. That means the person is present in the class, but if his mind is elsewhere, the words may fall on the ears. The ears may perceive the sounds, but they are not registered by the mind. They are not known. Or similarly, if somebody is too preoccupied with something else, there may be somebody who is passing back and forth in front of him, or something is happening in front of him, but he just gives this blank stare. That is what happens if the mind is not backing the sense organ. Therefore, even the mind qualifies as a light. Then Vedanta goes one step further and it says that even the mind is backed by consciousness. If the consciousness is not there, then the mind also cannot function as a light. And therefore, this consciousness, the Atma, is also qualifies as a light. And therefore, if we take the shloka, the tatra suryo bhati na chandra tarakam nema vidyuto bhanti kutoyam agnihi. So he uses the two terms bhati and anubhati. तत्र सूर्यो भाति न चंद्र तारकम नेमा विद्युतो भान्ति कुतोयम अग्निः तमेव भान्तम अनुभाति सर्वम तस्य भासा सर्वमिदं विभाति. So anubhati, bhati. So there's a difference in the meanings of these two words. We can start by saying that the sun shines. The surya bhati, sun shines. But then when we see that the sun shining is dependent upon the eyes, then we revise the statement to say surya anubhati chakshurdvayam bhati. Meaning that the sun shines after the eyes. The sun shines after the eyes shine. Surya anubhati chakshuhu bhati. The eyes shine, the sun shines after the eyes shine, meaning the absence of the eyes, the sun cannot shine. Then we go one step further and we say, Manaha bhati chakshuhu anubhati. The eyes shine after, it is the mind that shines. But then we go one step further and we say, Manaha api anubhati, Atma bhati. The Atma shines and the mind shines after the Atma. In the presence of the Atma, only the mind is also known. The mind can function like a light. But then we ask the question, does Atma also shine after something? Atma api anubhati va? Na va? Atma anubhati va? Is the question. Does Atma shine after something else? Is there something else because of which Atma shines? So we say, na, Atma swayam bhati. Atma shines by itself without any other light without requiring the presence of any other light. Atma shines. And therefore, Atma is called by the Upanishads as the ultimate light, Jyotisham Jyotihi. It is the light of all the lights. Therefore, here Bhagavad says, we look at this verse, bhasyate, yad bhasa, bhasyate arkadi. So he says, bhasyate, meaning all of these are illuminated. What are illuminated? Arkadi bhasyate. Like the sun, the moon, the stars, the lightning, the fire, and even the sense object, sense organs, and the mind. All of these are lights. But they are all illuminated. Arkadi bhasyate. Bhasyate is the second word in the first quarter. Yad bhasa bhasyate arkadi. So arkadi bhasyate. By what? What are they illuminated by? Yad bhasa, he says. Yad bhasa. And yasya bhasa. Meaning by whose light? By whose light all of these luminaries like the sun, moon, stars, lightning, fire, and even my sense organs and the mind, by whose light they are illuminated. By the light of which awareness they are illuminated is what he's saying. Yad bhasa arkadi bhasyate. So that awareness, he says, na bhasyate, yat na bhasyate, that awareness which illumines all of these luminaries, itself is not illuminated. Bhasyaihi yat tu na bhasyate, meaning na bhasyate, it is not illuminated. Bhasyaihi, by all of these luminaries. So the illumination is one way. The Atma illumines all of them, but these don't illumine the Atma. Bhasyaihi yattuna bhasyate. So the Atma is not illumined by any of these. Just like the sun illuminates the moon, all right. But the moon doesn't illumine the sun. As we have seen this example, you are shining a mirror at the sun. The sun illumines the mirror, but the mirror need not. The mirror cannot illumine the sun. The mirror need not illumine the sun. So similarly, all these luminaries function in the light of the Atma. But Atma itself doesn't need to be illumined by any of these. So even the mind and sense organs, they all function like lights in the presence of the Atma. The mind and sense organs are not required to illuminate the Atma. So Atma is Swayam Jyotihi, as we saw. And then he says, Pyena Sarvamidam Bhati. So Bhati means shine, they shine, or it shines. What shines? Sarvam, Sarvam, Idam Sarvam. All of this shines. Yena, by which. So that same light of awareness that because of which all these luminaries function like luminaries and which is not illuminated by any other luminary, itself illumines all of this. Yena sarvam idam bhati. So we can raise a question here that my sense organs and my mind also play a role in illumining this world. So I can also say my sense organs illumine any object that I'm looking at, or my mind is illumining that object. So shouldn't the credit go to the sense organs and the mind? So we point out that you take the example of the sun and the moon. The sun illumines the moon, and on a dark night the moon illumines the earth. Now who should we give credit to for the illumination? We ask that question, should the credit go to the moon or the sun? So we have to say that eventually it is the sun that is illumining that dark night, all the objects in the dark night. It is the sun that is illumining through the moon. The moon is just a reflecting medium via which the light of the sun is illumining the earth. In fact, there is no such thing called moonlight that is separate from the sunlight. The moonlight is only an avatara of the sunlight, you can say. The sunlight descends on the moon and then illumines the earth. So similarly here also, one can ask a question that, okay, the mind and the sense organs are also illuminating. They are also lights that are illuminating the world. So here again we say that the credit should go to the Atma, because it is only in the presence of the Atma that the mind and the sense organs borrow this reflected consciousness. And with that reflected consciousness, they illuminate everything else. And therefore, the credit should go to the original consciousness, not to the reflected consciousness. Therefore, yena sarvamidam bhati is by the light of the Atma that everything here is illuminated. Tad brahmetyavadharayet, know this light of consciousness, know the ultimate light of consciousness, which is Jyotisham Jyotihi, the light of all lights. Know that to be Brahman. And then Bhagavad continues on the same theme. We will read the next verse, verse 62. Swayam antarbahirvyapya
स्वयम् अन्तर्बहिर्व्याप्य
bhasayannakhilan jagat
भासयन्नखिलं जगत्
brahma prakashate vanni
ब्रह्म प्रकाशते वह्नि
prataptaya sapindavat.
प्रतप्ताय स पिण्डवत्.
So Bhagavad is continuing on the same theme. And here we can take an example to understand what Bhagavad is saying. So let us say that we pick an object. For example, let's say we pick this book here, the Ātma Bodha. So if I ask, what is this? Then you will say that this is a book. So I ask, what else is here? So then you will say that it is, the color green is there, and then there is also this letters printed on the book. So people will point all this out. I ask, what else is here? And then after a while, we are thinking about what else to say. So generally people miss something that is very important, which is here, which is the light principle, because of which this book is known to me, to all of us. So it is not just the book, but it is book plus the light that makes this book known. So to know any object in this world, we require that the object be pervaded by light. Similarly, Vedanta points out that to know any object in this world, that object has to be pervaded by consciousness also. So when I know any object in the world, then there are two things there. Of course, you can say the object is there and the light is also there. So there are, of course, multiple things there, but one of the key ingredients that makes the object known to me is the pervasion of consciousness. We may use the word pervasion once in a while. It may be an unfamiliar word if you are hearing it for the first time. But you can translate it as pervaded by consciousness. Just like the book has to be pervaded by light. So there's pervasion of light to know the book, to see the colors of the book, to see the form of the book. Similarly, to know any object, there should be pervasion of consciousness. It has to be pervaded by consciousness. So now, how is the light known? If you say the book is pervaded by light, then how is the light known? You say the light is self-revealing. Since the light pervades everything and reveals everything. But how is the light itself known? Because the light is self-revealing. Similarly, how is the consciousness known? As we saw, consciousness is Swayam Prakashaha, consciousness is self-revealing. We don't need another consciousness or another light in order to know this consciousness. Now, if you open the book, there are all these letters. Now, you will not be able to read all this because the distance is an obstacle. But let's say that the book is close to me. Every letter has to be pervaded by light in order to know that letter. Similarly, every little thing that is known has to be pervaded by consciousness. So that there may be we may be talking about something internal, some sensation in the body or some thought in the mind or any object in the world. Unless it is pervaded by consciousness, it cannot be known, whether it be internal or external. So we'll come to the verse with this background to understand this verse. Swayam antar bahir vyapya bhasayan akhilan jagat brahma prakashate vanni prataptaya sapindavat. So he says prakashate. Prakashate means it shines. What shines? Brahma prakashate. Brahman shines. Brahma prakashate. And how does it shine? Brahma swayam prakashate. We take the word swayam from the first line. Swayam antar bahir vyapya. So Brahma swayam prakashate. Brahman shines by itself. Without any other luminary, Brahman shines by itself. And having done what? Vyapya, antar bahir vyapya. Meaning having pervaded, vyapya. Having pervaded, Brahman shines by itself. Having pervaded what? Antar bahihi. Meaning having pervaded everything inside and outside. So all of my internal conditions like hunger, thirst, or emotions, or decisions, beliefs, knowledge, memories, whatever it be, all of this internal world is pervaded by Brahman. That is why it is known to me. All of the mind, the whole mind and all of the thoughts in the mind, they are all pervaded by Atma, that is Brahman. And therefore, all of this entire mind being made of the subtle matter, as we have seen, the mind and thoughts are made of subtle matter. They are pervaded by this consciousness, and they also carry this reflection of consciousness, the Chidabhasa. Therefore, they shine with this reflected consciousness. Therefore, they are known to me even as the conditions of the mind change. At this moment, I am hungry. And then once I have the food, I know that I am satiated. So all of these conditions of the internal world are illuminated. All of these thoughts, they shine with reflected consciousness. And bahihi vyapya, all of the external objects also, they are illuminated by the light of consciousness for them to be known. So unlike the internal world, where everything is known automatically, because it's all subtle matter, therefore, if it's pervaded by Atma, it carries the reflection of consciousness automatically. And therefore, it is all automatically known even as the condition of the mind changes. The world outside is not automatically known. It has to be contacted by a mind. And the mind contacts the object. Then the thought of the mind goes through the sense organ and pervades the object. When the thought pervades the object, the reflected consciousness also pervades the object. Then the object is known to me because of the pervasion of consciousness. The consciousness spreads over the object, carried by the thought. And therefore, all of these outside objects are also known to me because they are pervaded by consciousness, by the light of consciousness. So we can think about there being 5 beams of consciousness, 5 beams of consciousness coming through each of my sense organs. So through my ears, there's a beam of consciousness that spreads over the Śabda Pramāṇa, the world of sound. And then through the organ of touch, we can imagine there's a beam of consciousness that spreads over the Sparsha Pramāṇa, the world of touches. And then through my eyes, there's a beam of consciousness that spreads over the Rupa Pramāṇa. Through the tongue, there's a beam of consciousness that spreads over the Rasa Pramāṇa. And through the nose, through the sense of smell, there's a beam of consciousness that spreads over the Gandha Pramāṇa. So whenever I know something, seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, or touching, I should know that it is pervaded by consciousness. Because just like whenever I read any letter in this book, that letter has been pervaded by light, only then it is known. So similarly, anything that is known here, inside or outside, it is pervaded by consciousness, only then it is known. Swayam antar bahir vyapya, having pervaded the entire internal world and this external world. Bhasayan akhilam jagat, it illumines this entire world, whether it be internal or external. And Brahma Swayam Prakashate. How is Brahman itself known? Brahman Atma is self-revealing. We'll go to the next verse, but before that, just one more point about this. Yes, there is, he gives the example here that we did not touch upon. Vanni prataptayasa pindavat. Bhagavad talked about the butter pervading milk in one of the earlier verses. Shire sarpihi iva akhile. So here Bhagavad is giving another example of fire pervading an iron ball. Just like fire pervades an iron ball, now the iron ball begins to glow and it can also burn. It can also burn the skin if you touch it. So this glowing of the iron ball and its burning is because of the pervasion of fire, because it is pervaded by fire. But do we see that fire separately? So we don't see that fire separately. We see it, we see that iron ball glowing. But we know that it is because of an independent principle called Agnihi that this iron ball is glowing. Vanni prataptayasa pindavat. Ayasa pinda means iron ball. Ayasa pinda. Vanni pratapta. Ayasa pindavat. Vanni pratapta means it has been heated by fire. Ayasa pinda means iron ball. The iron ball heated by fire, like an iron ball heated by fire. We see the iron ball glowing. We don't see the Agni separately, but we know that Agni is a separate principle. It is not an attribute of the iron ball. It is not a part, product, or property of matter, as we see. We'll come to that. So just like this Agni is a separate principle, similarly this consciousness also a separate principle. Consciousness is not a part, product, or property of matter. Consciousness is an independent principle that pervades matter and makes it known. Consciousness is not limited by the boundaries of any material object. So this is what we gather from the example that Brahman pervades the entire internal and external world, but it is a separate principle that does this illumination. We'll come to the next verse. Jagat vilakshanam Brahma
Jagad vilakshanam Brahma
Brahmanonyanna kinchana
Brahmanonyanna kinchana
Brahmanyat bhati chen mithya
Brahmanyadbhati chen mithya
Yatha marumarichika.
Yatha marumarichika.
Bhagavad gave us these two examples of butter pervading milk and fire pervading this iron pinda, ayasa pinda, iron ball. Then those two examples, in both of those examples, butter as well as the milk and the fire and the iron ball are in the same order of reality. And therefore, the examples don't do complete justice to our situation. The best example is really the pot and the clay. If you take the pot and the clay. So if you are seeing the pot, if you are seeing only the pot, then my attention needs to be drawn to the clay. And therefore, we would say that the clay is not the pot. And therefore, here Bhagavad says, Jagat Vilakshanam Brahma. Brahma Jagat Vilakshanam. Brahman is an independent principle, a separate principle, other than this world. This is how we start. Because the attention is on the world, the attention is on the pot, and he misses the clay. Then we have to bring the clay into his consciousness, into his understanding. So then we talk about the clay as being separate from the pot. Similarly, here we talk about Brahman being separate from this world, but this is just the beginning stage. But then we go on to say, Brahmanaha anyat na kinchana. This is what Bhagavad says in the second part of Brahmanaha anyat na kinchana. But other than Brahman, there is nothing else. So if we take the example of the pot, we say that the clay is other than the pot. This is in order to bring the clay into the understanding of the person. But then we point out that the pot is nothing but clay. Clay is other than the pot, but the pot is nothing but clay. Therefore, there is nothing really other than the clay. Clay alone is. Similarly, Brahman is other than this world. Now we have world and Brahman. But then we point out that there is no second thing other than Brahman. Really speaking, the world is Brahman. There is no second thing other than Brahman. Brahmanaha anyat na kinchana. Nothing else other than Brahman. So we say this in that the Vedantic equation works a little differently. We say A is B, but B is not A. Or we can take it the other way around. It's easier to remember. We say that A is not B, B is A. So you can think of this in terms of actor and beggar. Actor being A and beggar being B. So we say the beggar is the actor. The actor is not the beggar. The actor can put on other costumes and become something else also. The actor is not the beggar. But without the actor, the beggar cannot be there. The beggar is the actor. Actor in a certain costume. Beggar is the actor in a certain costume. The actor is not the beggar. Similarly, Brahman is not the world. Brahman can exist without the world. But the world is just Brahman in the costume of all these Namarupa. And therefore the world is Brahman. Pot is clay. Clay is not the pot. So this is how Satyam and Mithya works. There are two orders of reality here. Therefore, Brahmanaha anyat na kinchana. Brahmanyat bhati chet mithya. If you are seeing something else other than Brahman, then that is mithya. So if your attention is on the pot and you have not understood that there is the clay, then that pot has to be taken to be mithya. So we are saying here, Brahmanyat bhati chet mithya. So if you are seeing this world that is other than Brahman, then that world is mithya. So one may say here that but I am experiencing the world. How do you say it is mithya? I am experiencing it. It looks so solid, so real. So we point out that experienceability is not the criteria for reality. We have seen this before. Experienceability is not the criteria for reality. Because we experience the blue sky. The blue sky really does not exist. We experience the flat earth. The flat earth also does not exist in reality. We experience the rising sun. But there is no sun that rises and sets in reality. We experience a dream. But there is no dream in reality. Therefore, experienceability is not the criteria for reality. In fact, experienceability means Nama-rupa has come in. Some Nama-rupa has come in. And if we are experiencing Nama-rupa, then whatever is experienced is mithya. It's a criteria for mithya. Vedanta turns the tables around and says, you are experiencing something that is drishyam, that has got Nama-rupa, that is mithya, not the satya. And therefore, whatever else is experienced independently existing is mithya. Brahmanyat bhati chet mithya. And Bhagavad gives the example of yatha maru marichika, meaning just like mirage water. You experience the mirage water, but experienceability is not the criteria for reality. You experience the mirage water, but when you go near it, you find there is no water, there is only the sand. And therefore, if you are experiencing something else as independently existing other than Brahman, then that is not the reality. It doesn't really have an independent existence. It is like Maru Marichika, it is like this mirage water. And the next verse also continues on a similar theme. So we will complete that also. Drishyate shruyate yadyat
दृश्यते श्रूयते यद्यत्
ब्रह्मणोऽन्यन्न तद्भवेत्
ब्रह्मणोऽन्यन्न तद्भवेत्
तत्त्वज्ञानाच्च तद्ब्रह्म
तत्त्वज्ञानाच्च तद्ब्रह्म
सच्चिदानन्दमद्वयम्.
सच्चिदानन्दमद्वयम्.
So Bhagavad is continuing on the same theme. If you look at the last word of the second quarter, and there he says, na tad bhavet, the last part of the second quarter, na tad bhavet. So if you were to split it, it says drishyate shruyate yad yat brahmanah anyat na tad bhavet. Na tad bhavet. So it doesn't exist, he says, na tad bhavet. What doesn't exist? Drishyate, shruyate, yat yat, says the first quarter. Drishyate, shruyate, yat yat. So whatever is seen, drishyate, whatever is heard, shruyate, and we can extend it to whatever is smelled, tasted, touched, meaning the entire world that is perceived. It doesn't exist. How? How does it not exist? Anyat na bhavet. Drishyate, shruyate, yat yat, tad anyat na bhavet. So anyat is there in the second quarter. Drishyate, shruyate, yat yat, brahmanah anyat na bhavet. Na tad bhavet. So it doesn't exist separately from Brahman, he says. Whatever is seen, whatever is heard, whatever is touched, smelt, etc. Whatever that is, meaning the entire perceived world does not exist separately from Brahman. Brahmanah anyat na tat bhavet. But it is mistaken to exist separately. That is the problem, because of the ignorance of Brahman, because of not knowing that there is this underlying reality that pervades everything, because of not knowing that, we take the world to be independently existing. So it is mistaken as a separate world. And therefore, he says, Tattvajnanacha Tat Brahma. So according to Vedanta, there is only one thing that really exists. Just like if you were to take if we were to take what is in front of me, which is the pot, what really exists is the clay. The clay jnani knows that what is really there is a clay. The clay ajnani will say what is there is a pot. So the same thing is called pot or clay depending on one's vision. What is one's vision is the question. Clay jnani calls the same thing clay. The clay ajnani calls it a pot. But there is only one thing really speaking, which is the clay. So similarly now if we take this example of the pot and the clay. Now the clay jnani wants to educate the clay ajnani that there is the clay, there is only the clay. So he has to accept the pot to begin with. If he is seeing only the pot and he talks about clay, the clay ajnani will not understand what he is talking about. Therefore, he accepts that the clay jnani also accepts for the time being that the pot is there. And then he talks about the pot. But he also brings in clay into the picture. And now he talks about two things. Where there is really one thing, he talks about two things. He talks about the pot and he talks about the clay. And then he talks about clay becoming the cause of the pot. He talks about the pot being born out of the clay, the pot being sustained by the clay, and the pot resolving back into the clay. And then the clay jnani can take classes on this topic for 5 years. He can teach this, he can talk about the pot and the clay, the pot and the clay, the pot being the karyam, the clay being the karanam, the clay being the srishti, sthiti, laya karanam for the pot, etc. But what happens in the end? In the end, he says, only the clay, the pot is not really there at all. That is what he comes to. So, the one and the same thing is known as the pot by the clay ajnani and is known as the clay by the clay jnani. So, similarly, here too, there is only one thing which is Brahman. The Brahma jnani sees only Brahman here, but the Brahma ajnani sees the world. And therefore, in order to teach the ajnani, the Brahma jnani has to first bring in the idea of Brahman. And then he talks about Brahman being the Karanam, the world being the Karyam, Brahman being the Sthiti, Shrishti, Sthiti, Laya Karanam for the world. And he can take classes about this for a while until this idea of Brahman has firmly entered this person's mind. So now there are two things, not the clay, the world and Brahman. There are two things. But then finally he points out that there is only Brahman. There is no second thing other than Brahman at all. Brahmanaha anyat na kinchana, as we saw. Brahmanaha anyat na tad bhavet in this verse itself. Drishyate shruyate yadyat Brahmanah anyat na tad bhavet. It is not separate from Brahman. And tattva jnanat chat tat Brahma, once this tattva jnanam is there, tattva jnanam means that Brahman is the only reality. Once the knowledge enters the mind, then he sees only Brahman. He says there is only Brahman. So what changed now? What changed? Earlier he was calling it, the clay ajnani was calling it the pot. Now the clay ajnani has become a clay jnani and he says there is just the clay. Similarly, earlier the Brahma ajnani, the Atma ajnani was calling this a separate world. But now that he knows he has Atma jnanam, he has Brahma jnanam, he calls this Brahman. What has changed? It is just that the ajnanam has been removed. The tattva ajnanam has been removed and now there is tattva jnanam. What has changed is just that the ajnanam has been removed and now there is jnanam. And therefore, tattva jnanat tachat cha tat Brahma. Whatever he was calling as a separate world earlier, after Tattva Jnanam, he now calls it Brahman. Tattva Jnanat cha tat Brahma. Whatever is Shruyate, Drishyate, whatever he was calling a separately perceived world, now he says there is only Brahman. The world is, there is no second thing called the world. And what is that? Satchidanandam Atvayam. Atvayam, there is no second thing called the world. There is only Brahman, which is of the nature of Sat, Chit, and Ananda, of the nature of existence, consciousness, limitless, all pervading existence, consciousness, that is Brahman alone is. Tattva Jnanat cha tat Brahma. We'll continue in the next class. In the next class, we are hoping to complete the text. There are just 4 verses remaining now. So we should hopefully complete Ātma Bodha in our next class. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.